Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today is video number 32 of my Beginning Gardener series, and it's finally time to plant the vining crops in my garden. Now, I'm actually not going to plant them out today. I am going to start them by seed indoors. Now, vining crops are the squashes, the cucumbers, the melons, watermelons, stuff like that. Normally, it is really best to just plant the seeds directly out in your garden beds. But I have some beautiful little quail that live out in my yard, and their very, very favorite thing to eat is newly sprouted cucumbers and squash seeds. So I have tried for years to just seed those out in the garden and have them grow, and they get eaten every single time. But what I've noticed is the quail will leave those seeds alone if they have like 2 of the true leaves. I don't know if the flavor changes or they're just too big, but I've taken to starting my seeds indoors. So let me show you what I'm going to be starting and what I'm not going to be starting, and talk to you a little bit about why. Now, the first thing we need to talk about is what kind of soil I start my seeds in. Now, this is the potting soil that I make. I don't use seed starting mix because these seeds are large and we don't need seed starting mix. And this way I don't have to pot them up. I just start them in these pots and they'll be good to go. But this mix is a mix that I make myself. It has coconut coir, compost, and perlite in it. I add a little bit of fertilizer and a little bit of worm castings, and that gives it enough nutrition to just keep it without even having to fertilize until it's time to plant them outdoors. And these are the seeds that I'm going to start. I don't have a lot of room in my garden, so I am very careful about what I start. What I am going to be doing is the summer squash. Now, summer squash are the squashes that have the thin skins, the ones that you don't have to leave in the garden until they get hard. You can eat them at a small stage or even a little bit larger stage, but if they get too large, they're not good anymore. The seeds get too big. So I love the yellow crookneck squash. I'm only going to have 1 plant of that one because of the space issues, and because I find that I usually only like to eat them fresh. I don't like to preserve these. To preserve them, you can freeze them or freeze dry them, but I just like eating them fresh. We're going to have the Costa Romanesco zucchini. I found this has a really nutty, wonderful flavor. I don't normally like zucchini, but this zucchini I do like. We're going to do one of those. And this is a new one. I tried it last year, but I planted it a little bit late, and I had a really difficult time growing my squash in ground. We're going to go raised beds this year, but in ground they just didn't do as well last year. So this is one that I wanted to try because this one can be used as a summer squash where you can eat it when it's really young, or you can just leave it and use it as a winter squash. So now let's talk about the winter squashes. Winter squashes are storage squashes. You don't eat them young, you wait. Hey Gigi, how you doing? He wants to see the squash today. So winter squash are not ones that you eat young. They're ones that you leave in the garden and let the skins get hard. And that way you can store them over a long period of time. I've had squash store most of the winter. Get that fluffy tail out of the way. Oh, he's so cute. Here. The next one is spaghetti squash. I absolutely love spaghetti squash. We're going to have 2 of each of my winter squash. So the spaghetti squash will have 2. The butternut squash will have 2. And then I'm going to grow one not for the squash, not for the flesh, but for the seeds. Last year I grew the Naked Bear pepita squash, and this is the Lady Godiva pepita squash. I want to see which one I like better. The Naked Bear, the seeds tasted amazing. They were just kind of small squashes. So these seem to be a little bit larger, so we'll see if we like the flavor as much. And next is a topaz melon. Now, there's a little bit of a story about the topaz melon. My children's father is Japanese. He's 3rd generation. His parents grew up here in Utah. Maybe as some of you know, during World War II, there were internment camps made. And in Utah, there was an internment camp, and it was called Topaz. Now, the people who were interned at the Topaz internment camp, they did grow their own gardens. They did grow a melon, and they called it the topaz melon. Now, I found somebody online in Utah who actually had the seeds, and I got some from him a couple of years ago. And those seeds were so old, none of them germinated. But another friend of mine, she actually got some seeds, grew them out, and were able to get them to produce. Sorry. And we're able to get them. Here, why don't you lie down right there? Good job. And she was able to get them to produce melons. And she actually gave me a melon last year, and it was so, so good. And these are the seeds that I saved from that melon. So anyway, these have a special meaning to me, and we're going to be growing those for the first time this year. So these are viable seeds, and I'm excited to see if I can get this to grow. Now with summer squash can vine a little bit, but mostly it stays in one area. The winter squash are vining squash, so you either need a support or you need to allow a large enough area for them to vine over. And I just kind of let mine sprawl all over the ground. I don't have supports that I've put in yet. I'm finishing up adding new beds, and I may start adding supports for squash and other vegetables that need climbing supports, but I don't have those right now, so I'm just going to let my winter squash vine along the ground. So the last thing that I'm going to be planting, and I won't be planting it now, I'll be planting them in July, are my cucumbers. Now, cucumbers grow very, very quickly, and they produce very quickly. I plant mine in July, and they're completely done by the end of August. I don't eat a lot of fresh cucumbers, so I mostly grow them for pickles. So it really works for me to wait until one of my beds is empty that's growing my spring crops, plant my cucumbers in July, have them done by the end of August, and plant my fall crops. So you can either succession sow your cucumbers, so you have a long season of cucumbers if you really like to eat them fresh, or you can just do a nice, quick, fast batch of cucumbers. I usually plant 7 of them, and that gives me enough for a year's supply of pickles. So now that we've talked a little bit about vining crops and what they look like, let's talk a little bit about their care. So any vining crop that you plant is going to need a full sun area, as much sun as you can give it. They're not going to fruit very well if they get part shade. The next thing you're going to need to pay attention to is fertilizer. They do like to be fertilized. They're heavy feeders, but they do not like too much nitrogen. You need to fertilize with a balanced fertilizer or with compost. And then the last thing is water. Vining plants grow fast, they've got huge leaves, and they need a lot of water. So you need to watch them carefully, put them on a regular watering schedule, and watch them carefully. When the leaves start to wilt a little bit, you need to water them. Now, I do have to say, during the hottest part of the summer, they will wilt whether they're watered or not, just in the middle of the day, and that's okay. Just make sure they are not staying wilted into the mid-afternoon, because if they're still wilted by then you will need to be adding more water. And the last thing is they need either a trellis or a large space to sprawl. My winter squash have had years where they've covered up to 15 feet around. So they can get huge if you let them. So like I said, either get a trellis or just give them a lot of area to cover. So now that we've talked about how to grow the vining crops, let's show you how I plant them. So the first thing I'm going to plant is the topaz melon. Now all vining plants have large seeds, and if you look at the back of the seed packet, it says you need to plant them about 3/4 of an inch deep. You can go up to an inch or down to a 1/2 inch, just depending on the size of the seed, and each variety is going to be a different size. So the first one that I'm going to plant is going to be the topaz melon, and their seeds are pretty small. So that's the size of the seeds. Now I'm going to be planting 2 pots of topaz melon. I will share any of the extra seeds, but I want at least 2 plants of topaz melon. So we're going to toss the seed in there. So we're going to do 1 on each corner. So I can either eliminate the extra seedlings, or I can pot them into a different pot and share them with somebody, which is probably what I'll end up doing. So the center cut squash has larger seeds. We'll plant those probably about an inch deep. And they are planted exactly the same way, so let's get those done. Now I like to eat my summer squash fresh, so I'm not going to be planting as many of those. I'm just going to do 1 pot, do 1 seed on each corner, just so that I can make sure I have germination. I just want 1 plant of each variety of summer squash. So we did the center cut, next comes the crookneck squash. And last is the Costa Romanesca zucchini. These are very tasty, just a nutty flavor. So I usually don't like zucchini, but this is what we're going to be planting for this year, and we'll have 1 plant of this one. Next is going to be the butternut squash. It's one of my favorite winter squashes. It tastes really, really good, nice silky texture. Love this, and it stores really, really well. And I'm going to want 2 of each of my winter squash, so I'm going to plant 2 containers, 4 in each container, just to make sure we have germination, and I can either share the extra seedlings or thin them out. Now for the spaghetti squash, it's another one of my favorites, and I'm going to want 2 of those. So once again, we're going to do 2 pots with 4 in each and either thin out or share the seedlings. Now last is the Lady Godiva, and as I said, these are the ones that we're growing for the seeds only. The reason we grow these for the seeds is because they are a seed that is completely edible. It doesn't have a hole on the outside. Now you could probably eat this squash seed, but it's going to have a very fibrous, tough hole. You'd have to peel that off, and then you can eat the seed inside of this one. But this one, you don't have to peel a hole off of it. So that's why we grow either the Lady Godiva, Naked Bear. There's a lot of different varieties, and we're just going through all the different varieties and trying them out. So these are also going to be planted 1 inch deep, and I want 4 of these plants because we're growing them for the seeds, and I eat a lot of the seeds. So we're going to have to plant 12 of them in 4 pots, and then thin out the extras or share them with somebody. So the last thing I need to do is water these in thoroughly. Now normally when I grow my plants indoors and I grow them under grow lights, I put a humidity dome over the top. But this soil is pretty moist, it stays moist, and squash germinates extremely quickly. They should germinate within the next 5 days or so. Once they're done germinating, they're usually ready to go outside in 2 or 3 weeks. So that's one of the mistakes that a lot of gardeners make, is they'll start their squash and their cucumbers and their melons right when they start their tomatoes and have 6 weeks before it's time to put them out in the garden. Now, if you do that, they're just not going to survive very well. They grow very quickly, and you'll quickly run out of space in your grow room, and their roots will run out of space in their pots. So start them really late. Just start them at the very, very most 4 weeks before you need to plant them out in the garden. Now, the time of year that you can plant them out is after your first frost date. And if you can wait after your first frost date until the temperatures are consistently in the high 50s at night, that would be even better. Squash really need it warm, and squash, cucumbers, and melons really need it warm to grow well. So hopefully this video has been helpful for you, and I would love to see comments below of your favorite type of summer veggies that are vining plants, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.